Okay, so you just heard that ruling from the judge there in the Tremaine Wilbourn case there in Memphis, Tennessee, that Tremaine will not return to the courtroom because of his disrespect, because of the outburst that he's been making throughout this trial. Joining me right now, Elura Nanos. Elura, what do you think of this bombshell decision here by the judge to keep the defendant out of the courtroom? And this is the sentencing phase right now.
I mean, I think it's always risky to keep the defendant out of his own proceedings because there are certainly situations where such a thing would constitute reversible error on appeal. But truthfully, in this case, I think the judge has done the right thing. And I think this defendant, his behavior has been so egregious and so outrageous that it's clear that the judge really, to preserve the integrity of the process, had not a lot of options there.
Right. So we saw, just minutes ago, for those that are just joining us, the prosecutor getting in Tremaine Wilbourn's face and pointing the finger and calling him a coward for the shooting death of Officer Sean Bolton. He shot him 8 times, for those that are just joining us. What do you think was going on in that prosecutor's mind when she actually went up to him and pointed him out and called him a coward?
I mean, I think that in a case like this, that is a high-stakes case, that's a high drama and a high emotion case, I think it's perfectly natural for the prosecutor to show that kind of passion in the courtroom. And I think that, for the most part, there's nothing wrong with that. But when it escalates the drama to a level that then takes it outside the normal parameters of court, then we potentially have a problem. Yeah,
and you can see it there on your screen. She is like just inches away from the defendant in this case, Mr. Wilbourn, who again shot Officer Sean Bolton in Memphis back on August 1st of 2015. So what do you make, Elura, of the claim, the outburst of racism because the prosecution got in his face? How does that translate to racism?
I mean, I think that's ridiculous, but I think that it's something that, defense arguments make and talk about racism in a courtroom. Racism is a very real thing, has a very real impact in the criminal justice system. That said, not everything that disadvantages a defendant is the product of racism. And actually, I think that in this context, talking about racism here does a serious disservice to anyone that is out there fighting against racism, because this is clearly about a murder prosecution. This is not about racism. This is about maybe a prosecutor going a little far, getting a little carried away with the drama. But truthfully, I don't see any reason to believe this is about racism. I think that's insane.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the judge has just ordered that Tremaine Wilbourn does not return to that courtroom. Let's get back to that courtroom right now in Memphis, Tennessee. Okay, again, this is a death penalty case. Tremaine Wilbourn shot and killed Officer Sean Bolton back in 2015. Elura, quick question for you, because we talked about the racism aspect of this earlier with that outburst that we saw from the defendant. But his claim back in 2015 was it was self-defense because police officers had been shooting black men in this country. But keep in mind, Bolton was shot 8 times. He never drew his weapon. So how does this defendant, Tremaine Wilbourn, say that this was self-defense?
Well, I mean, obviously it's very difficult for him to say that, which is why that defense didn't work. Look, I do think that the coverage of major police shootings, particularly against black men, is a factor. And I think that there are cases where the fear of such a thing happening is relevant to a particular case because it's relevant to how people act in those police stops. I just think that in this case it doesn't work because that's just not what happened here. I think there are cases where, shooting of unarmed men is something that affects how people act in that circumstance. But there's nothing to indicate that it was that type of scenario here. Everything indicates a typical police stop and a murderer. So I just don't see it playing out here.
Yeah, and keep in mind, too, there were drugs in the car as well as Tremaine was armed with that gun. So one of the things I always tell people, as a former police officer, you never know what's in the car. More importantly, you never know who's in the car and what their intentions are. There's a lot going on in Memphis. Again, this is a death penalty case for Tremaine Wilbourn. He was found guilty this past Sunday for the 2015 murder of Officer Sean Bolton, and Memphis. We're going to take a quick break. We have so much more to come. Stay tuned to the Law and Crime Network. Okay, the prosecution's still giving the closing arguments here in the Zachary Keene case. Laura, I want to ask you something here. You're a parent, I'm a parent. I'm the father of a son. He's 17 years old, but I remember when he was born, I gave him my name. I couldn't wait to tell people I had a son. But the prosecution brought up something very interesting here. He never told one of his closest friends about little Sterling. And one of the things she said, every time that Zachary would take a bath, he was neglecting, he was being selfish. What do you take of that as a parent? How can you do that?
Really hit on something that really can be made quite a bit bigger even than this prosecutor did. The fact that a parent is secretive about even having a child shows that there is something deeply, disturbingly wrong going on. I mean, this is not, there are cases of child neglect that really do come from parents being ill-equipped to be parents or, parents abusing drugs. But this goes far beyond that. And I actually think that this goes beyond neglect. It goes to very real abuse that really, to me, seems intentional because that is not normal behavior.
Right. I'm sorry, Laura, you mentioned drugs. Now, we understand that both Zachary and Sterling's mother were using meth. I mean, Sterling was born with meth in his system. So do you think that played into what was really going on in that house? But you still can't exclude the fact that they had a 2-year-old that appeared to be taken care of.
Well, certainly, I don't think that you can look at this case without understanding the impact that serious drug use had on these people. Clearly, that is a major part of this picture. But I think that you're right to say, look, there's another child in the house, and they did at least somewhat better by that child. It does indicate that there may have been really a more sinister motive beyond just neglect and drug addiction that led to this baby's murder. We heard from the prosecutor that Zachary Keene may not have believed that this child was actually his child. Who knows? There may be an entire backstory that really leads to this man hating this baby, which would actually explain the death in a way that to me seems much more logical than that he just forgot about him in the corner for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, but I mean, a baby's a baby. It's not the baby's fault that they're here. Again, the prosecution is giving their closing arguments in Zachary Keene. He's on trial right now for the murder of his 4-month-old son, little Sterling. We're going to take a quick break and get right back into that courtroom. Stay tuned. Okay, so the defense, you can see, is giving closing arguments in the state of Iowa versus Zachary Keene. Now, he said that it was Cheyenne Harris's primary responsibility to take care of little Sterling. Again, Zachary Keene right now on trial for the death of 4-month-old little Sterling. The prosecution said he was malnourished, dehydrated, and a lot of other things going on inside that home. Now, will he be convicted? We don't know, but we know Cheyenne Harris is next to stand trial for this death of little Sterling there inside that home. Again, the defense is giving closing arguments. We heard the prosecution give their closing arguments, and the prosecutor actually said that every time Zachary would come in and take a bath or take a shower or turn on his fan, he was being selfish. It was an act. It was a choice. Laura, how do you think the defense is doing right now?
I am not at all convinced by anything the defense is saying. I mean, and having said that, this is a very difficult case for the defense. There's almost nothing that he can really say. But I will say this. I think that he made kind of a misstep because he said, I'm not here to villainize Cheyenne. I'm not here to blame her. But in fact, that's exactly what he should be doing. And that is exactly what he is doing. And he should be very upfront about it. He should be comfortable saying, this wasn't my client's fault. This was the child's mother's fault. And if he's not comfortable saying that and being blunt about it, then he should not be asking the jurors to make that determination.
Yeah, well, I think he did say that, saying she was the primary caretaker, and he said from the beginning he doesn't change diapers. He was brought up that way. It's part of his religion. But again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier. I'm a parent. You're a parent. We know sometimes you don't want to do things. You don't want to get up at 3 in the morning to change that diaper or to warm up that bottle, but it is your responsibility. You know, I think, albeit I don't want to take away from anyone's religion, but as a parent, that is your overall responsibility. What say you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, any inkling that there's some sort of religious reason or some sort of, that this man has a particular role within his parenting and that excuses his egregious behavior, that is absolutely absurd and totally disrespectful toward any religious people. I don't even want to hear any arguments about that whatsoever. This man was a father. He had responsibilities. He chose to starve his child to death. He chose to neglect his child to death, and the child died.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, state of Iowa versus Zachary Keeney's on trial right now for the murder of his little son, Sterling, who was found with maggots inside his swing. Very, very tragic thing going on here. The defense is still giving closing arguments. We'll be back in that courtroom on the other side of this break. Stay tuned to the Law and Crime Network. You don't want to miss what's going on in that courtroom. Okay, that was earlier this morning in that Memphis courtroom. Again, Tremaine was on trial for the murder of Sean Bolton. He was found guilty this past Sunday. Sean Bolton was a police officer, shot 8 times. Originally, Tremaine Wilbourn claimed self-defense. That did not work. You saw the prosecution there get in his face, call him a coward. I still have my 2 guests with me, Elura and Yosha. Elura, I'll start with you. What do you think of that outburst by the prosecution? Do you think it was justified? Do you think she was just fed up?
I mean, I actually don't think either of those things is true. I don't think it was a good idea, but I don't think that it's that she sort of lost control. I think what it's more that she maybe in the moment, just kind of took that drama a little far. And if you look at it, you see that when she was doing that pointing, she actually wasn't even looking at the defendant. So she may not even have realized quite how close she got or quite how over the top that moment was. That's my guess, is that she kind of got in the middle of that argument, kind of lost track of herself.
Right. Yosha, do you think this will play out to the jury, that outburst by this prosecutor here? You think that'll play out in which way they decide to go on this?
I think it's just a small blip on behalf of the prosecution. I think they'll definitely be able to move on from it, but it does reek of a little bit of unprofessionalism from the prosecutor. I mean, she's someone who has done her job. She has a case where this is not necessary. This is already such a strong case. So to have such an outburst just seems so strange, but I do think, given the gravity of this case, given the horrible thing that happened in this case, I don't think the jury is going to hang their hat on that outburst. I think for the moment it probably captivated everyone, but I think they're going to move on and really look at the mitigating factors and then look at the aggravating factors for the sentencing phase.
Right. And to your point, Tremaine Wilbourn says he did not receive a fair trial. Let's take a look to see what he said about that.